Maude Barlow, the foremost water warrior in the world, the woman who spearheaded the campaign in the United Nations to make water a human right in 2010, is going to be joining us. The author of 17 books is going to be joining us in the afternoon.
I'm extremely honoured to introduce the next speaker, Maude Barlow. Because I suppose when I got the job of writing the report, it was Maude Barlow's book was the first thing that you went out and you read and familiarised yourself with it. Maude is the National Chairperson of the Council of Canadians, the chair of the Washington-based Food and Water Watch, a recipient of 12 honorary doctorates and endless awards, including the Right Livelihood Award, which is described as the Alternative Nobel Prize. Maude has been a tireless political activist on food sovereignty, globalization, and particularly on water. And she was a senior UN advisor on water and led the campaign to have water recognised as a human right by the United Nations. And that recognition in 2010, it was from that the campaign to do the same at EU level was born. And almost 2 million people across the EU signed a citizens' initiative which calls specifically on the European Commission to recognise water as a human right and to abandon its privatisation agenda, because they say it's not their competency, they don't interfere in how countries operate their water, but every one of us knows that that's not the case, and they're doing it through the Troika. They've done it in Greece, they're trying to do it in Ireland, but in Ireland they have to set up the body in order to privatise it first. That call by the citizens was ignored, and I then took the campaign to add the Parliament's voice to that call. And last September, the European Parliament, without the support, surprise, surprise, of Fine Gael, rightly demanded that the recognition of water as a human right be enshrined in EU legislation. It called for an end to cut-offs. 80,000 families in Spain are without water today because of cut-offs. And for the exclusion of water from trade deals, which we heard about from John Hillary this morning, such as TTIP. So the battle is far from over, but if it wasn't for the inspiration and the tireless work of people like our next speaker, we would not have achieved as much as we have. So please show your warm Right2Change appreciation for Maude Barlow.
Lynn, thank you so very much, and I'm absolutely honoured and delighted to be here. Thank you to you, thank you to Brendan, Dave, Billy, Unite, Mandate, the Right to Water, and may I say thank you for expanding from the Right to Water to the Right to Change. I think it's a wonderful transition, and people around the world are watching this. You may or may not believe it. We've made you quite famous in Canada, so congratulations and thank you. And I want to say that this is absolutely fabulous. I sat and read a lot of it last night. It's just full of wonderful stuff. It's cheeky, and you're probably going to get into a little trouble over doing this, but I just want to quote to you from a woman who was our first member of Parliament back in 1916 or something. Her name was Nellie McClung. She was forever doing things that people said, oh, you can't do that. And her motto was, never retreat, never explain, never apologize, get the thing done, and let them howl. So good on you. It's fabulous. So your government tells you that it's just charging for water through meters, which is happening all over the world, and what are you all excited about? Well, let me tell you, there is a global movement growing to bring us together to fight meters, just as we have come together to fight privatization of water services and municipalities and for the right to water and so on, because there are many things wrong with metering, as we're learning in many countries around the world. Most importantly, metering disproportionately hurts the poor and the middle class, and you just heard that fabulous presentation by Anne about what's coming and how the debt load and how the latest manifestation of this global reality is going to continue to hurt people. What metering does, of course, is make life harder and harder and harder. And once you're metering and once you've moved to what's essentially a semi-private or a parallel private system, you can just keep jacking the prices up as much as you want. And it also puts all the blame on residential users and small business and leaves all around the globe 90% of the water use untouched, no royalties, no taxes for the large industries and so on. So it's really asking people who are already struggling to take up the whole burden. But Irish Water is doing more than just metering, and I want to be really clear. When they say they're doing just what other countries are doing, this is not true. What they're doing is mirroring something that the World Bank has imposed in a number of southern countries, and that is they're saying if you want debt relief, you have to transform your public utility into something that starts to behave like a private utility. Even though technically it's still government-owned, technically, you must, and this was the deal that was done with the IMF and the European Central Bank around getting debt relief a few years ago, that the Irish Water had to be created. It had to be created to act as if it's a private enterprise, and it had to base its pricing on full cost recovery, which is not necessarily the metering process, for instance, in my country. So I want to be really clear. Metering is bad, but this type of metering and the movement to establish Irish Water as a private model, even though technically it's not yet, is a real problem. And then it's just a hop, skip, and a jump for a future government to bring in a public-private partnership, because you've already got the entity, the utility, acting as if it's commercial and private, and then it's just a hop, skip, and a jump to turning the tap off. And as you just heard Lynn say, there have been cut-offs through the austerity program in Spain, in Italy, in Greece, a number of other European countries. A lot of people don't know this, but there have been thousands and thousands of water cut-offs. There have been some good news on the right to water front. A judge in France said that it is against their constitution to cut water off to people on the inability to pay, but now we're having to take this at a court level. In my part of the world, I live in Ottawa, Canada, we haven't yet started cut-offs in my country, but they started off really big time in the United States. And the saddest story that I know, and I've been very involved in it, is the city of Detroit, which is very much a free trade story, because Detroit was an auto manufacturing center. And when NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, came along, the companies were allowed to move their production offshore to Mexico, and there was massive job loss, and about 1 million people moved out of inner city Detroit, leaving behind poor people, largely African American, and unemployed people. And what happened was then they didn't have the tax base to produce basic public services, so they started to charge much higher rates of water. They just doubled and then they tripled the rates, and so the poorest people, just about the poorest people in the United States, were now asked to pay hugely higher water rates. And it wasn't yet privatized. They're on their way to privatizing, but they brought in a general manager because they declared the city bankrupt, and the manager said, okay, we want to prepare this company, this utility, to be privatized, and so we're going to start cut-offs. And they announced 2.5 years ago that they were going to cut off 3,000 families a week. Now try to imagine what we're talking about here. That's no water for toilets, for hygiene, for children, for cooking, no water to look after old people, to look after sick people, no water. And they were coming into whole blocks, and just people would get up in the morning, 6 o'clock in the morning, they'd hear them move in, and they would just come in and shut down the whole block. And not very long after, in a number of cases, social agencies would come in and take the children away, because you can't be raising small children in a home that doesn't have running water. Now this is in one of the richest countries in the world, and by the way, Detroit is right on the Great Lakes, which is the 5th of the world's water surface lakes. And so the tragedy and the travesty of it is very, very clear. But let me tell you, this is happening there and many places. Now, once privatized, once you get this system, then, as you heard from John Hillary today, then trade agreements like CETA, you've heard probably a lot more about TTIP, but the Canadian one is called CETA, Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement. It's the first one coming up. And I keep saying to my friends in Europe, please pay attention to this, because it's the little cousin, the evil little cousin of TTIP, and it's coming first. And even if you happen to win TTIP and hold it off, that miracle happens, American companies can still sue you just by coming through Canada. We have lived in Canada with ISDS, this investor-state rights under the North American Free Trade Agreement, for 21 years now. And let me tell you, it's a mess. We're the most sued country in the so-called developed world. Right at the moment, there are 1.75 billion euros of challenges against Canada from American corporations, mostly for environmental rules, many of them involving water and water protection. So water gets it. Once you've privatized under these agreements, it's impossible to go back because you have to pay compensation, and also any environmental rules that you bring in to protect water can be challenged. So it's really important to put the fight for water justice together with the trade justice fight. So we're facing a perfect storm of water injustice in the future, and there's three parts to it. Part one is that we have a global water crisis. Now trust me, I don't have time, and if you get me going on this, you'll have to get a sheep hook and take me off, because this is like in my soul. I am so worried sick about the global water crisis. We have a wonderful water scientist in Canada who says it's not going to be long before all anybody is talking about is water. It's just amazing that they are having yet another presidential election in the United States and nobody's mentioning water, when the entire Southwest, huge parts of the Midwest, and huge parts of the Southeast are in terrible drought. And it's not just drought, it's running out of water. And let me tell you, there's a big difference. We are damming our rivers to death. Most rivers no longer reach the ocean in the world. We are pulling up our groundwater so fast around the world that there are huge parts of the world that are already depleted. And we're using technology that didn't exist before the 1950s. So try to imagine, this is not something we've been doing over millennia. This is since the 1950s, when in the United States they discovered the first of these deep bore wells that could pull the water deep out of the ground, and all of a sudden what you've done is turned a parched desert into an oasis. But of course the oasis comes to an end when that water runs out, and it is running out, believe me, all over the US. But it's running out all over the world. NASA now has satellite technology and is able to map where the major groundwater is, and they said that there are 37 major aquifers in the world. Fully a third of them are almost fully depleted. Another third are in serious trouble. China, believe it or not, was a water-rich country. Guess what? Since 1990, half their rivers are gone. They disappeared. They don't know where they are. Brazil, considered the country with the most water in the world, always the UN top water country in terms of water wealth, is experienced severe drought that it never had in recorded history. Why? Because they're cutting down the Amazon, and when they take down the Amazon, what are called flying rivers, which are great big currents of vapor that are given off by the rainforest and travel thousands of kilometers and rain like clockwork on Sao Paulo, they're gone, it's gone. And so Sao Paulo, with 20 million people, is in such crisis that they're talking about maybe having to move 20 million people, although they have no idea where they're going to go. And you just want to check today's Guardian. There's a big news story in The Guardian and many other papers, the strongest statistics I've read anywhere, and that is that 4 billion people in the world, this is today, 2/3 of the world's population experiences severe water shortage every year for at least 1 month. Now this isn't today, this is a study that's just come out. This isn't some future. I'm just finishing a book as we speak on the water crisis in Canada. And yes, you heard right, the water crisis in Canada. So please believe me, there's not a place on earth this could not happen to. So that's number one of the perfect storm. Number two is the growing inequality, which I know we've been hearing about during the day, but the gap between rich and poor is growing. The top 1%, as you now know, own 50% of the world's wealth. And the UN talks about the precariat, and that is the 3/4 of work-age people around the world who don't have a decent job, don't have security, who are in precarious work, 3/4 of the world. When they tell us it's doing just fine, or this model that Anne just described is just going to do fine, I just want to say, and how's that going for you? How do you explain to us this 3/4 of the world not having access to secure jobs? Where do you think the pensions are going to come from, the public services and so on? So this inequality is hitting Europe and it's hitting North America in a way that makes us truly a global world in some of the more distressing ways. The number 3, of course, then for water is rising water rates. If you get the reality that all countries have to put money into aging infrastructure and growing populations that need new infrastructure, plus they have to put money into water protection, but they won't raise taxes or they won't tax the rich. We've just come out of a government in Canada that brought us to the 2nd lowest level of corporate taxes in the OECD. Our new government, supposed to be wonderful and progressive and different and new, and our Prime Minister is really cute, he's very hot. When he went to Thailand, the Thai government had to put out a statement to the women reporters not to squeal and shriek and scream when they saw him. I mean it, I'm not making that up. Take a look, he's cute. He's not going to touch court. He's not going to change back. He's not going to bring us back to the level we were at before our terrible last government. And we don't have the money for infrastructure. So what happens is they have to turn, it's just exactly as Anne said, to you, to the rentier, to that economy. And so that's why the prices continue to go up. And this again is setting off the reality for mass cutoffs here in Ireland and globally. So don't believe them when they tell you that this is just an economizing way to modernize the water system here in Ireland. This is a 1, 2, 3 step to privatization and to raising the kinds of rates of water that happened in London, happened in all over England when Thatcher privatized water. There's no reason that it won't happen here except that we won't let it. So we're fighting back, and I don't want to leave you with negative thoughts that there's nothing to be done. There's just a tremendous global social justice movement, water justice movement. I call us water warriors. And we have done amazing things. We've been fighting this group called the World Water Council, which has a World Water Forum every 3 years. They pretend they're a big UN conference and they get thousands and thousands of people at it, and we show up and we spoil their party every single time. We have wonderful protests, we're smarter than they are, we're more interesting, and we always get, as Anne said, way more media. And in 2010, we had a huge breakthrough. We've been fighting for the United Nations to recognize the human rights to water and sanitation. We were told it wouldn't happen for years and years. My country led the fight against it. Your country was opposed. Great Britain was opposed. United States was opposed. And we worked tirelessly at the UN to get this moved, and it was a wonderful man named Pablo Solo, who was then the ambassador to the UN from Bolivia, who got up and gave us a presentation when he put the resolution to the UN, and everybody said, well, you have to change it, make it gentler, give people time, take out sanitation. And he said, take out sanitation, it's dirty sanitation, it's dirty water that's killing so many people. He said, I'd rather lose a good resolution than win a flawed resolution. So he put it to them. He said, I want to know which countries are going to stand up against the human right to water. And he read from a report that had just come out that week from the World Health Organization, that in the Global South, every day, every 3.5 seconds, a child dies of waterborne disease. And then he held up his fingers like this, and then the half. And that was it. The place broke out in applause and we won. I thought we were going to lose. I was absolutely, I was there with my staff who were kind of in tears because I kept saying, we're going to lose. It's okay. You lose first and you win later. Don't worry. And I was giving them the whole pep talk. We just were blown away. 122 countries voted in favor. No country, not yours or mine, had the guts to vote against it. They abstained. And I'll never forget, I was standing in the balcony with Pablo Solon, who was just had his arms crossed. We were just smiling from ear to ear. And one after another, our ambassadors got up and lectured him like this and said, you pushed this, we weren't ready for this. And Pablo stood there with this big shit-eating grin, as if to say, and what part of I just won and you didn't, do you not get? It was like one of those moments that happens, right? Huge day for us, and what it meant was that the human species took a collective evolutionary step forward, because we said it is not okay to have to watch your child die of waterborne disease because you don't have to pay, you don't have the money to pay for it. We said that collectively as a human species. And now governments are responsible to ensure all governments the accessible, clean water to their people, and when they allow water to become so commodified, or when they use pricing, as the situation is here in Europe, to determine who will get water and who will not, they are violating the human rights to water and sanitation as now declared a full right by the United Nations. And we're very excited to tell you that globally over 4 countries have either amended their constitutions or brought in legislation to declare water to be a human right. Some of them before knowing this vote was coming, many of them after. So it's a really exciting process, the best day of my life, work life for sure. It was a deeply moving thing to be involved in. And that success story is remunicipalization of cities that have experimented with privatization. 235 cities since the year 2000 who tried experimenting with privatization said this didn't work, this was a terrible mistake, and they have brought their water systems back under public control. They include Paris, they include Berlin, a lot of big countries, or big cities, sorry. And what was nice about Paris is that they were able within 2 years to drop the rate of water rates to their people, and they were able to put a whole bunch of money aside for sustainability and for water protection and for new infrastructure. Because of course when you have a for-profit company running your water service, that 15 or 20% that you could use for so many other good things has to go to your private investors. So that's been a really incredibly exciting project. Another one has been something we call Blue Communities, and I would love to come back and work with you on Dublin becoming a Blue Community. Started in Canada, I know, but it can happen, it can happen. A Blue Community is a municipality that votes to recognize water as a human right, to protect it as a public trust, and to promote public water over bottled water, private water, in a process. That started in Canada, and we now have 21 cities that have become blue. I only thought of it as a Canadian issue until I went to Switzerland a few years ago and talked to the mayor, who's fabulous, Mayor of Bern, and he said, I want to go blue. So now Bern is blue, their major church there is blue, most of their unions have gone blue. We think Zurich's going to go blue, their universities are going blue, and this is the home of Nestle. This is where Nestle lives. The guy, Peter Brabeck, who's the head of Nestle, I don't dislike very many people, but I'm not fond of this man. Not only because he has a bottled water empire that's something like 72 bottled water companies around the world, depleting groundwater and hurting people's local water sources, but he is the most senior advisor to the World Bank on water policy in the Global South. So he advises on water privatization, no public water for you in poor countries, but then with his World Bank hat, then with his Nestle hat, he comes in and he sells them his Pure Life water. And he calls this Nestle's responsibility or living up to the human right, the UN human right to water. He says that this is what Nestle has taken on out of the goodness of their hearts. So when a municipality goes blue, it promises that it's going to think in a positive way. They see what's coming and they move to change this. And we just heard, and I am beyond excited, that Paris is going to become a blue community this spring, and I'm going to go to Paris and officiate at the ceremony. And so if it can happen to a country, to a city, and 40 other cities in France where Veolia and Suez started, it can happen here, and I promise you that. few thoughts. I want to talk a little bit about hope. First of all, I want to say this to you. The fight that we're in collectively, because I don't say you, it's us around the world, around water is not an issue of charity. This is an issue of justice. The right to water is an issue of justice. Nobody is giving us anything. These are our fundamental rights. They are also inherent prior rights for all Indigenous peoples around the world, and it's incredibly important for us to understand how deep and far back these rights go. And so you are fighting for the right to water. You are fighting for your legitimate and UN-recognized human right. Water is also a public trust that no one should be able to appropriate for private profit. And the ways in which they're coming at us is not just privatization of municipal utilities, although that's one, and it's not just bottled water, it's water trading. Chile and Texas and Australia have gone water trading, and that's where you convert the corporate or industrial farming water license to a water property, and then you allow them to exchange it. And they did this in Australia because they were in desperate need of these corporations cutting, and everybody cutting their water use because they were facing this horrible drought. And their thinking was, well, if the big industrial users can make money by conserving water and then selling it, they'll conserve it. Won't that be right? That's not what happened. What happened is that the big companies bought the little companies, the big industrial food producers bought the little farms, then the big investors came in, then the big global investors came in, and the price of water went through the roof. And when the government, a new government, a Labour government came in and tried to buy the water rights back because the very Darling was running out of water, they couldn't afford it. They gave away the fundamental rights of water to their people, and this is happening in places around the world. Then we have something new called water pollution trading, starting in the United States but coming to a community near you, where a polluter of water can actually trade the right to continue to pollute by, I don't know, giving money to a poor country in Africa to help build wells, that kind of thing. It's a kind of carbon offset. It's like market trading for carbon, only with water. And on and on and on. There are so many ways in which we are losing control of our public water, and it is so important that we are on top of this. So I just want to say yes to your election, good luck to your election, but I would like to leave you with just 3 quotes on hope, because I think hope is an incredibly important thing. And like Anne said, I know you're going to do fabulously in this election, holding your issues up front and center, but one election isn't going to change the struggle that you have, just as one election didn't change the struggle that we're having in Canada. Even if this were the best government in the world, in my country, they haven't started to undo the terrible damage that's been done. So it's not just getting the right government, but it's then undoing 3 decades of terrible policy. So I want to share with you something that I wrote to some people who lost a big fight a couple of years ago in New Hampshire. It was a big water taking. They were fighting against a huge bottled water company. Their group was called SOG, Save Our Groundwater, wonderful people. And they lost. Actually, they eventually won, but at this point they lost, and they were thinking of disbanding. And one of the people wrote and said, can you give us some words of wisdom? Because I don't want to disband, but everybody's pretty bummed out. So I'm going to share with you what I wrote to them, because I just want to talk to you about hope. So I said, let me share with you what I have learned from 30 years of activism. It's not about winning a particular case or even a campaign. It's about building a movement that is sustainable. It's about democracy, and it's about supporting one another through hard times. It's about laughter and good food together. It's about long hours driving to long meetings. It's about trust and friendship. It's about protecting all that is good for future generations and the planet. It's about a commitment to a dream that is larger than any one of its parts. We have to learn to see victory in small things, a new friend, an emerging new network, new information we didn't have before, and we have to recognize that sometimes our victories may come as subtle, complex, slow changes instead of the big wins we would like to see, and we need to count them as wins anyway. And this week, I know, we have to say that it is always too soon to go home. It is always too soon to give up on a campaign or a dream. As my 90-year-old friend reminds me, fighting for social justice is not a fashion to be worn one day and thrown out the next. It's a lifetime commitment and comes with many deep valleys and the occasional soaring mountain. Social justice is like taking a bath, she says to us. You do it every day or you stink. My second to last message is by a woman named Rebecca Solnit. She is an American activist from California. She wrote a book called Hope in the Dark, and I love this, and I want to share this with you. The future is dark, yes, but as inscrutable, not terrible. Many transform this unknowability into something certain and awful, the fulfillment of their dread, the place beyond which there is no way forward. But again and again, far stranger things have happened than the end of the world. That is because we do not see the myriad of changes happening in the area of human rights and justice, for example, that would have been thought impossible only decades ago. The world is wilder than our imaginations. Causes and effect assume history marches forward, but history's not an army. History is a crab scuttling sideways, a drip of soft water wearing away stone, an earthquake breaking centuries of tension. Sometimes one person inspires a movement, or her words do decades later. Sometimes a few passionate people change the world. Sometimes they start a mass movement, and millions do. Sometimes those millions are stirred by the same outrage or the same ideal, and change comes upon us like a change of weather. To hope is to gamble. It's to bet on the future, on your desires, on the possibility that an open heart and uncertainty are better than gloom and safety. To hope is dangerous, and yet it is the opposite of fear. For fear is to risk. To live is to risk. Hope would shove you out the door. Hope just means that another world might be possible, not promised, not guaranteed. Hope calls for action. Action is impossible without hope. To hope is to give yourself to the future, and that commitment to the future makes the present inhabitable. Anything could happen, and whether we act or not has everything to do with it. Aren't those gorgeous words? And my last quote is from Gandalf. It's Lord of the Rings. Gandalf is speaking before the terrible night when the armies of evil have come, and they may snuff out everything good in the world. They may destroy all beauty. And I read those books and watch those films as an assault on nature, which is why I love it when the trees fight back, because I really do think it's about killing the human spirit, killing the human soul is killing nature. So Gandalf is talking about facing this night, and he says this, because I want to say this to you, you're a bunch of water stewards, and he's talking about being a steward, and Gandalf says this: the rule of no realm is mine, but all those things that are worthy in the world, those are my care. And I shall not fail in my task if anything passes through this night that can still grow fair and grow fruit and flower in the days to come. For I too am a steward. Did you not know? Thank you so much.
Gracias.